My name is Eleanor Harris, and for most of my life, I've thought of myself as a mother before anything else. Not a widow, not a retired school counselor, not even a woman with her own thoughts, dreams, or needs, just mom. Just the person who made birthday cakes, gave rides to ballet practice, paid for braces, and stayed up late to wash soccer uniforms that came home covered in mud and grass stains. So when my daughter, Alyssa, texted me after nearly a month of silence, I felt that same rush of hope I always did. Maybe she wanted to talk. Maybe she missed me. But instead, her message was cold, rehearsed, and final. She wrote, "We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore. At all." I stared at the screen, reading those words over and over like they were written in a language I didn't understand. Space from me? As if I'd been chasing her down, demanding attention, suffocating her. The reality was, I'd been waiting for a call, a visit, a simple hello that never came. The words didn't just sting, they hollowed me out. I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hand, feeling something inside me split open. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even confused yet. I was just empty. A silence filled the room that felt louder than any scream. For days, I kept coming back to that message, trying to make sense of it. I told myself she was overwhelmed. Maybe it was temporary, that maybe I'd done something wrong without realizing it. I thought I knew why, but I was wrong. After my husband passed away 7 years ago, I poured everything I had into Alyssa and her family. It felt like the only thing keeping me grounded, the only way to make the grief bearable. I didn't just lose my partner. I lost the rhythm of daily life, the comfort of shared silence, and the future we'd planned together. So when Alyssa and her husband, Jason, said they needed help with the down payment for their new house, I didn't hesitate. I transferred the money that afternoon. When their second child was born and they worried about covering both preschool tuition and diapers, I adjusted my budget to send monthly support. When Jason lost his job and decided to launch his own consulting business, I quietly paid their rent for 8 months. None of it felt like a burden at the time. It felt like love, like doing what a mother was supposed to do. I wanted them to feel safe, to never experience the fear I felt after losing Robert. But somewhere along the way, those gestures stopped being appreciated and started being expected. I can't remember the last time Alyssa called just to check in. Every conversation became a subtle transaction. She'd mention a camp fee or a broken washing machine, and I'd pull out my checkbook before she even had to ask. At family gatherings, Jason would give me tight, performative hugs and say all the right things, but his eyes were always scanning the room for someone more interesting. The kids, once bubbly and affectionate, now buried their faces in screens unless I offered gifts or cash. Still, I convinced myself it was enough, that being useful was the same as being loved. I held on to every thank you note, every obligatory hug, like it was proof I mattered. I told myself this was what closeness looked like when your children grew up and had families of their own. I told myself I was lucky they still needed me. But slowly, that need replaced the love. And I let it happen because I was afraid that without giving, I had nothing left to offer. My last birthday was on a Thursday. I remember because I had spent most of that week shopping for the ingredients to make Alyssa's favorite beef stew. Not mine, hers. It was the one meal she used to ask for when she was little, the one I made every year on her birthday and sometimes mine, just to feel close to her. I spent hours in the kitchen, peeling vegetables with hands that stiffen more than they used to. I took my time with every step, slow and careful, because I wanted it to be perfect. I set the table for 4, even though I knew the kids probably wouldn't sit for long. I lit candles. I even made that ridiculous chocolate pudding cake Jason liked, the one I always thought was too sweet. By 5 o'clock, I had changed into a soft blue sweater and sat by the window, watching the street. Every time I saw a car that even vaguely resembled their black SUV, I felt my heart stutter. By 6, I started making excuses. Maybe traffic, maybe a last-minute emergency, maybe they just forgot to text. By 7, The stew had gone cold. I didn't touch it. I couldn't bring myself to eat alone at a table I had set for people who never intended to come. I left the candles burning until they sputtered out on their own. I didn't cry that night, though. I just went to bed with my clothes still on, staring at the ceiling, too numb for tears. 3 days later, Alyssa texted. Not to apologize, not to explain, just a flat message that said, "Happy belated birthday. You should have reminded me." I read it 3 times, each word stinging more than the last. Reminded her. As if it were my job to flag my own birthday like a calendar alert in her schedule. As if I were a task she might have completed. If only I'd been more efficient about it. That was the moment something inside me cracked. I wasn't sad. Not really. I was humiliated. To realize that my presence had become so insignificant that even my birthday, the one day that was supposed to belong to me, was now my responsibility to manage. I had worked so hard for so long to stay relevant in her life. And there it was. Proof that I no longer was. I didn't respond right away. I stared at that message, thinking maybe if I waited, another would follow. One who said she was sorry, one that sounded like love. But nothing came. Just silence. And a stew in my freezer that I still haven't touched. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed with the blinds half open, watching the city lights flicker against the ceiling. My phone sat face down on the nightstand, silent as a stone. For once, I didn't hope it would ring. The next morning, I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at nothing for a long time. Then, without overthinking it, I picked up the phone and called David Levin, my lawyer. We'd worked together since Robert passed. He knew the trust, the transfers, the whole structure better than anyone. When he answered, I kept my voice steady. I told him I wanted to suspend all automatic payments to Alyssa's household immediately. No explanations, no warnings. Just stop. He asked if everything was okay, and I said yes, which wasn't a lie. It was the most okay I'd felt in years. After we hung up, I stood by the window and waited for something: guilt, doubt, fear, but none of it came. What I felt instead was quiet. A deep, unfamiliar quiet settled in my chest like peace. For the first time in a long time, I had done something not out of love, or obligation, or fear, but out of self-respect. I didn't call Alyssa to let her know. I didn't text, or send an email, or leave a voicemail. I didn't owe her that. Let her notice. Let her wonder. Let her sit in the silence she asked for, and realize that silence works both ways. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but for once, I was the one holding the cards, and I intended to hold them tight. It started with a text from Alyssa. Just one line. "Something weird's going on with the bank. Can you call me?" I saw it pop up on my screen while I was folding laundry, and I didn't even flinch. I put the phone face down and went back to my socks. By noon, she'd called 5 times. Each voicemail sounded more strained than the last. At first, she was polite, even upbeat. Just a quick question. Nothing urgent. But by the 3rd message, her voice cracked. Jason's credit card had been declined. The mortgage payment bounced. Had I changed something? I listened, then deleted each one. No response. No explanation. Just silence. She wanted space, remember? I was giving her exactly what she asked for. Apparently, space was only welcome when the bills were being paid. That evening, my grandson Lucas called. He's 12. A sweet kid, but not one to pick up the phone and call Grandma on his own. "Hi, Grandma. Just wanted to say hi. See how you're doing." I could practically hear the cue cards in his voice, the way he paused between words like someone had fed him the lines. I told him I was fine and let him go quickly. The next day, I got flowers. White tulips in a glass vase, delivered to my door with a card that said, "Thinking of you. Love. Alyssa and Jason." I stood there holding the arrangement like it was radioactive. Flowers. They hadn't sent flowers when Robert died. They hadn't sent flowers when I had surgery last year. But now, with the money gone, suddenly I was in their thoughts. That night, the phone rang again. Over and over. 9 calls in total. I let them all go to voicemail. Jason even left one. His voice was tight, like he was trying to stay calm. He said they were confused. That this felt like a misunderstanding. That they were worried about me. Worried. After years of barely acknowledging my health, suddenly I was fragile and in need of checking on. The shift was almost funny, if it hadn't been so insulting. Love, in their world, had always come with a receipt. This was just the first time the balance hit zero. I sat on the couch, phone buzzing on the armrest beside me, and felt a sadness so deep it didn't even ache anymore. It just pulsed, steady and quiet. They weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because they missed the money. And somewhere along the way, they'd stopped seeing the difference. 3 days after the flowers arrived, I had lunch with my friend Marlene at the garden club. She's known me since before Robert and I were married, and if anyone notices when something's off, it's her. She waited until after the salad to say it, her voice low, her eyes careful. Eleanor, people have been talking. Alyssa's been saying, you're not yourself lately. Forgetful. Paranoid. Erratic. I didn't understand at first. I asked what she meant, and she leaned in, her expression apologetic. That you've been making unusual financial choices since Robert died. Maybe you need someone to help manage things. My fork dropped onto the plate, and I just stared at her. I felt the air leave my chest like someone had kicked me. She was planting seeds. Not just about me being a little old and scatterbrained, but about being unfit. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, going over every conversation with Alyssa from the past year. The way she'd asked about how I was feeling, the sudden interest in whether I was keeping track of my prescriptions, the way she'd once joked that maybe I shouldn't be living alone in a place with stairs. What felt like concern now looked like a setup. The next morning, I called David again. I asked him plainly if anyone had contacted him about my mental state. There was a long pause before he answered. Yes. Alyssa called last week. She asked about how one would go about evaluating a parent's competency. She said she was worried about some of my decisions. I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep myself from shaking. I asked him what he told her, and he said the truth. That I was sharp, clear, absolutely in control of my affairs. Still, that she even tried. It was like a knife between my ribs. Alyssa wasn't just manipulating me emotionally anymore. She was laying the groundwork to take everything. It wasn't about a bounced mortgage payment. It wasn't even about cutting the money off. It was about power. Control. In her eyes, I'd gone from asset to obstacle, and she intended to move me out of the way, legally if she could, quietly if possible, and permanently if necessary. I spent the rest of that day in silence. Not grieving. Not crying. Planning. If they thought I was weak, they were about to learn something important. I'd survived the death of a husband, raised a child, managed a household, and kept my dignity intact through years of being treated like a checkbook. I hadn't come this far to be erased by my own daughter. By the time the sun set, I knew what I had to do, not just to protect myself, but to make sure they never tried this again. They wanted a story where I was the helpless old woman who'd lost her grip. Fine, I'd give them a story. But I'd be the one writing the ending. I invited them to dinner the following Friday. Alyssa sounded surprised when I called, but not suspicious. She said they'd love to come. She even asked if she could bring dessert. I told her not to worry. I had everything handled. They showed up, dressed for a performance. Jason wore a blazer. Alyssa had her hair curled just the way Robert used to like it. The kids gave me rehearsed hugs and complimented my earrings. They brought wine, flowers, and a candle that smelled like sugar cookies. It was the kind of gift you give when you've read an article about what to bring to an elderly relative. Dinner was forced. The kind of evening where everyone talks too loudly and laughs a beat too late. They asked about my garden, my health, my weekend plans. Jason told a story about a client that was just boring enough to pass for casual conversation. Alyssa kept touching my hand, telling me how good I looked, how grateful she was to see me smiling again. The food went cold faster than usual. No one seemed to notice. Everyone was too busy trying to act like a normal family, like nothing had ever happened. Like this wasn't a last-ditch attempt to regain control of the narrative they thought they owned. After dessert, I cleared the plates and came back with a small folder. I placed it in the center of the table without a word. Alyssa looked at it like it might explode. Jason stopped mid-sentence. I sat down slowly and folded my hands in my lap. Inside that folder were two things. A clean bill of mental health from a neurologist, whose reputation would make any judge think twice, and a report from a private investigator detailing their finances, their attorney consultations, and their attempt to prepare a guardianship petition behind my back. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply told them what I knew. I was aware of the meetings, the paperwork, the lies, that I knew about the secret account where they funneled money to keep it off the books, that I knew about the whispered conversations at the club, the subtle smear campaign meant to make me look unstable. They didn't speak. Not at first. Alyssa's face drained of color. Jason looked like someone had slammed a door shut on his future. I told them I'd contacted my lawyer, that the trust had been restructured, that the will had been rewritten, that the house they lived in, the one I bought, was no longer theirs to claim. I told them they had 30 days to vacate, that any further contact from them would go through legal channels, that I didn't care what story they spun after this. I had all the documentation I needed to protect myself, and frankly, I no longer cared what anyone thought of me. Then I stood, smoothed the front of my blouse, looked at them one last time, not as a mother looking at her children, but as a woman who had finally taken her power back. I walked out the front door, leaving them in silence, surrounded by the wreckage of their own performance. It felt like stepping into fresh air after years in a locked room. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't look back. When I got home that night, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I sat in the dark with a glass of water, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet ticking of the clock above the stove. The house felt different. Not empty, but open. Like something had been lifted. There was no joy in what I'd done, no satisfaction in cutting ties with my own daughter, but there was peace. A deep, still peace that came from knowing I had finally stopped begging to be loved on someone else's terms. I miss the version of Alyssa that used to run barefoot through the sprinkler in our old backyard. I miss the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after a nightmare. But I don't miss the silence. I don't miss the performance. And I don't miss being used. Some lessons cost more than others, but freedom was worth the price.